What's going on, guys? NealGuides here. Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to talk about the defensive styles FIFA 20, explain to you and show you the differences between them, and what minor changes have been changed basically in FIFA 20. As we know, it's a different game, so defensive styles have changed a bit. I've been testing this out for the past couple of weeks. I'll explain to you what's the best to use, how it's changed, which one you should use, and is it really effective? I think that's the most important thing. To make this as accurate as possible, what I've done is I've used this very cheap team. The players you can buy for 300 to 700 coins, it varies, but they're very, very cheap players. Just to give you a bit of an insight, all the tactics apart from the defensive styles will be on balanced, all on 5. Nothing else will change, just a defensive style. And the instructions are all going to be balanced on all the players. So when you do try it, there might be some slight variations. So obviously there's 5 now. Drop back, balanced, pressure on heavy touch, press after possession loss, and constant pressure, and in that order, going from, you can argue, the most offensive to like the most attacking. So let's start with the most offensive. Drop back. Now, to be completely honest, as you can probably see from this clip, you probably know drop back. You probably used it last year. It is very much OP. Probably is the most OP. I think it's not as, you can argue if it's OP or not, because I think now AI defending is kind of nerfed a bit, but it's still very effective. I think will be the most effective. Unfortunately now, because of rebounds, I find that, with drop back, because your defensive line is near to your goalkeeper, so if your goalkeeper does parry the ball away into the box, your defense line is there to latch onto the ball. So you can argue, and what I found is that drop back, you basically concede a lot less deflections and rebounds, unfortunately, but it seems like the only way. And of course with drop back, your defensive line is much more further back, as you probably know. If it's far forward, I know I keep going on about this, but with a higher defensive line, a simple through ball in behind, you're going to die. Especially, and I mean that as in, obviously the game demise. But what I'm trying to say is, it's going to be easy for someone to get past you, especially now how OP pace is. Unless you have defenders above 85 to 90 pace, you're going to struggle. So that's why I think drop back is still very much OP. Only thing is, with drop back, unfortunately speaking, your players, they do sit back. It does invite pressure in. So if you're not one that likes to invite pressure in, it's not the best formation to use. It might be a formation to use when you're just 0-0 or it's 1-1. It's an even playground. Or maybe if you're winning and you just want to kind of close the game out, see the game out and play for the counter attack. But of course, when you do play drop back, as you can see, a lot of players are still in my half. So when you do recover the ball and eventually win possession, it's going to be like a transition period, and it's going to take a long time for your players to go forward. So just do bear that in mind. It's a bit on the defensive side. Now, moving on now to balance. Now, balance is probably the best, and it's probably overall the most versatile. The main key thing you need to understand with balance is the depth is very important. The depth can alter, so you could have a low defensive balance line or a high defensive balance line. Ideally, I wouldn't go above 4 or 5, but generally speaking, the depth, as I would say, impacts balance the most. Now, balance is a very neutral, it's very balanced as it is named. The players, they generally stay in their positions. They do not overcommit. When the ball is in the middle of the pitch, they tend to press a little bit, but they maintain their position. That's what's important. They will press maybe just to close or kind of condense the pitch, but they won't leave their position. That's the most important thing. The players, they don't overcommit, they don't create gaps. That's why it's a very viable option. So if you don't want to play drop back and you think drop back's too defensive, balance is actually very good. I think especially in FIFA 20, I suppose it's been upped a little bit now as well. Especially if you're a manual player, you like to press manually. Balance is probably the best thing for you because your players don't overcommit into a position. They don't leave gaps. They don't expose themselves. So generally speaking, it's a really good tactic to use. Good all-rounder. I would say if you find yourself that you're a defensive player but you don't want to drop back, balance with like 3 depth is actually a very good combination. Balance with 3 depth is actually a really good combination. It's what I've been using quite a lot recently. But of course, just do be careful of the long balls in behind. Now, moving on now to pressure on heavy touch and press after possession loss. Now, I was going to say this. They are very similar indeed. Let me first start with pressure on heavy touch. Now, you can argue this is the best attacking one. The reason why is, in some respect, it's like balanced. Imagine it being like balanced. But what happens is when your opponent, let's say, makes a mistake, or let's say there's a loose ball, or they take a heavy touch, or let's say a ball is played to your opponent and they misplace the pass, or they take a really bad touch, or whatever like that. The good thing is your players, they press, as you can probably see on the diagram on a bottom right hand side. They press, and the good thing is you conserve energy this way. You don't overcommit. You only press when there's a good chance of winning the ball. That's the key here. When there's a good chance of winning the ball, that's what's important. When there's like a loose ball or there's like a difficult pass, then the players pounce. That's what's important. That's what's key. And they only kind of commit and they create a hole when there's a good chance of winning the ball. So it's kind of it's a slight risk and is a much higher reward, you can say, because if the opponent does lose the ball, when you do press, it's either you're going to win the ball, which is a very good chance because it's a loose ball, or there's a chance you can get unlucky and they recover the ball and they counter you. Of course, it does leave gaps. For example, your right back, if your right back's unbalanced and he's quite high up the pitch, your right back's going to press the player that's nearest to him, especially on the wing. So just do be careful on that. Your opponent may be able to bait you when using pressure on every touch, but I do think it's still a very viable option. It's good in FIFA 20, but it has been nerfed, I think because the game is much more slower. The game speed is much slower. So now players can quickly identify when you're pressing them, and now they can just quickly pass the ball away from you, or a simple lob through ball. So when they do get the ball, a simple lobbed pass in behind. Because obviously the game is much more slower. It takes them more time. It's much easier to read the game now. In contrast, press after possession loss is a difficult one. It's in some respect a very high risk and a very high reward. Now there's a very good chance you can win the ball higher up the pitch. But the big issue is you always press. When you lose the ball, I would say almost 90% of the time, you're going to press the ball. It's kind of Pep Guardiola-esque from, the Barcelona era, when the whole team just press after they lost the ball. But it's not that fluid in game. I think in FIFA 20, it's been nerfed significantly, and I've tested this a lot. I've tried different instructions. I still think it's been nerfed a bit more, especially because the game speed is much more slower. So basically, when the game speed is slower, your opponent can easily identify when you're pressing and look at. Basically, imagine if you just close your eyes and imagine the game is like in slow motion. If your opponent is pressing you, you can easily see that they're pressing you because you can see it very slowly. But when the game is much faster, happens lightning and very quickly, you can't notice it. But because the game speed is slower, it's become less effective. Now, obviously, this is very risky because you press when you lose the ball. That means there's a big chance that you lose the ball in the middle of the pitch and your players are not in a good position and they press and you're going to create a hole in your defense. That's the risk you're going to take. This is probably a formation you use when you're 1-0 down and it's like 70 minutes. You need to get a goal back. You don't want to go all out, but you want to start pressing. I would say do be careful with this. Fatigue is obviously going to be a big issue because you're going to be pressing quite a lot. And obviously, more importantly, what I would say is if you don't win the ball, you're pretty much screwed. To be completely honest, you're pretty much screwed. So do be careful with this. As I said, stamina is going to be affected and it's going to create gaps without a doubt. It's going to keep constant gaps. Even if there's not a good chance to win the ball, your players might automatically press. So do bear that in mind. The final one we're going to go to is constant pressure. Now, this is very similar to team press, but I'll get on to that. Now, constant pressure, I would say to never use this below 70 minutes. Now, if you use this from the first minute, your players are going to lose fitness like never before. They're going to be out of the game. This should only be used if you're desperate. In my opinion, if you're completely desperate, you should use constant pressure. This is like an all-out attack formation. You have 5-10 minutes left in the game. You need to get a goal or the game is lost. Obviously, your players are going to press all the time. They're always going to be pushed out of position. They're going to press whenever there's an opportunity to get the ball. Now, obviously, a very good player will bait you. That's why it's not advisable to use constant pressure. What it is advisable, as you can see now on your screen, is use in-game team press. Now, team press is very similar to constant pressure. It's basically identical in some respect. But you can turn it on and off as the game goes on. So you can use, for example, drop back and you can use constant pressure. That's the benefit. So you can use team press and drop back. So you're basically still dropping back, but you're also using team press. So it's very effective. However, what I would say is do not forget to turn it off. You should be using these in short bursts, maybe use it for like a couple of minutes. Let's say, for example, you find that your opponent's holding the ball too much or you need to get the goal back immediately and he's passing around. Then you can just flick the D-pad tactic, team press on, leave it on for a couple of minutes, and then when the player starts attacking again, you can turn it off. As I said, it's going to leave you very much exposed. Now, there is certain things you can argue width and depth go along with it. So obviously, the higher the width and the higher the depth, you can argue the higher the width, the higher the depth, the more gaps you're going to leave. Kind of think of it in that kind of parameter. So it's good to leave them in balance and try to leave them in accordance with each other. Don't have, for example, too much of a defensive width, too much of a wide width, and then obviously too much depth. You're going to be too high over the pitch, and your formation, depending on your formation, you might be too wide. But that's what I would say. But truthfully speaking, I've done some testing. I still think Dropback is going to be the meta. Unfortunately, it is probably the most useful one to use, especially when you're like, winning the game, or you just want to play the game slowly, trying to suss out your opponent. Balanced, I think, will be used a lot more this year. I'm probably going to try to use balanced a lot more, just because it's a bit more fun. I don't really like sitting back, and it's very good for the manual players. Pressure on every touch, it is still a viable option. It's much safer than, I would not even touch press after possession loss unless you really know what you're doing. If you know how to make covering runs, then probably touch this. Otherwise, I wouldn't really touch press after possession loss. Constant pressure, as I said, has been nerfed. Players can really see what you're doing. This only should be used, in the latter end of the game, the last 5-10 minutes, when you really need to win the ball back, or when you need to get the goal as soon as possible. One thing I would say to you, if you do play with team press, someone just subbed. If you do play with team press, or you do play with second offender press, or you naturally defend manually, use a run-in jockey, it might be worth delving into balance. I think balance is also a very good option. But anyway, guys, that's the video. Defensive styles. But interesting to know what you want to know. I mean, interesting to know what you think about the tactics. What I was going to say, and what tactics you're going to use. But interesting to see what you guys know and what you guys feel in game. As I said, depending on the instructions, I mean, obviously if you use, stay back while attacking or drop between defenders, and you use, for example, balanced, it will obviously skew the results. Players will act differently, but that's why I left it on balance, to give you a good representation. But anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching. If I had to recommend one or two, probably say Dropback and balanced. But anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Take it easy, and I'll catch you in the next one.